All right, guys. I need everybody back into Photoshop. Hopefully you still have this file of mine in Photoshop. Does everybody still have a file in there? Okay, again, and we were talking about the very same issue in here, that this thing is now a smart object which keeps the raw data intact. The single most important part about this. However, I want to do the brush thing again. So I want everybody to hit the B key and grab a paintbrush. And it can be, I don't care what size it is, I've still got that 400 guy. And I want you to come over and I want you to paint a big old black line on this image. And you will see that you cannot do that. The other thing to think about smart objects is this, that smart objects act like protective envelopes. So I'm going to show you exactly what that means. Thanks, Chrissy. Okay, so guys, everybody look at this. This is my smart object. It functions just like an envelope. It's a protective thing. And you put stuff inside of it. This is my image. In this case, it's raw data. So this is my raw file, and I'm putting it inside my smart object. And this smart object actually protects that raw file. So there's a lot of things you can't do to it. You can't paint on it. You'll see later on when we get into some of the retouching tools, clone stamping, which is basically taking pixels from one place and putting them in another thing. There's a whole bunch of things that we cannot actually do to this file. If you want to be able to actually work on the file, we need to make a copy of this and change it to a regular, what they call a regular layer. So to do that, if you look at your layers menu, this is where pretty much all the action happens in Photoshop, is right here in the layers menu. If you've got either channels or paths selected, just make sure you've got the layers tab is the one that I want you to have selected. You'll see a series of icons down here at the bottom, and they do different things. The first icon that you'll see on the far right-hand side is the delete layer. Now, that's clearly something we don't want to do right now. But if you had a layer up here that you wanted to get rid of, you simply drag it to the trash can. The next one over is actually create a brand new layer. Now, if you click on it, you'll see what I mean. It creates a blank layer. It's called layer number 1, and it's transparent. It's empty. And transparency in Photoshop is, the way they illustrate it is this checkerboard. If you look right to the left-hand side of these layers, you'll see little eyeballs. If you uncheck the eyeball down by the girl, it goes away. It's all you've done is turned its visibility off. However, you still see the checkerboard, and because the reason you're seeing the checkerboard is because you've got the eyeball on for the transparent layer, the layer that we actually put up on top. There's nothing in this layer. It's just the checkerboard indicates to you that this is a completely empty file. The eyeball right next to it. Look at right here where I'm talking about. The eyeball, it's on the left-hand side. Okay? You haven't made another layer yet. So first thing is to click on this to create a new layer. And now you'll see you have the checkerboard. And now if you click on the image, you'll see it, not the eyeball, right next to it. That just opened it back up. That's okay, you're back in camera raw. The way it should have worked, just say okay or hit cancel. It doesn't matter, either one, it's the same, it's the same. It's the same. Right next to this is where the eyeball goes, not the image. There's a little square. Click on it.
Oh. There's the eyeball.
All right. Did everybody get that? The little eyeball right here. Okay. Take the image layer that we've actually just created, the one's called layer number 1, and drag it down to the trash can. That's how you get rid of layers. Right? The next thing over looks like a folder, and it's the way we can actually group layers. We will do this in just a second. The next thing over is the thing that I was telling you guys about, the reason I don't keep the adjustment tab up anymore. If you click on the thing that looks like a circle that's half of it black and half of it white, and you hold this down, you will get a flyout menu that has all of these. These are actually called layer adjustments. These are adjustment layers. So you've got solid color at the top, gradient pattern, brightness and contrast, levels, curves, exposure, vibrant, saturation, color balance, black and white, photo filter, channel mixer, color lookup, invert, posterize, threshold, gradient map, and selective color. Out of all of these, you're not going to use all of these. We will use various ones. However, how many people in this room who have had experience in Photoshop right now are doing things like brightness and contrast? Does anybody in this room use this? I'm sorry?
For design stuff.
Okay. Yeah. Well, anyway, brightness and contrast is better dealt with a different control adjustment layer. How many people in here use exposure? You would never use exposure. Why would I never use exposure? Because I have it in Camera Raw. You are much better off double clicking, going back into Camera Raw and shifting your exposure here to reprocess your raw data than you are doing this in Photoshop. The file in Photoshop now, even though it's based on raw data, is baked. When I go back into Camera Raw, I'm going back to my original raw data and I can reprocess that. And it is infinitely better. You cannot believe how much better it is. So if you were going to change your exposure, you would not do that in Photoshop. You would simply come back here into Camera Raw and do it there. So
it's more accurate, you're saying?
it's not more accurate, it's more forgiving. In Photoshop, here's the deal. This is basically what happens. In Camera Raw, you have probably got, it depends on the bit depth of your camera. Most cameras are 14-bit. Who's got a calculator really quickly? Anybody? Yeah, on your phone. Just do this for me. So I want you to do 2 times 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 2. I did that 14 times. That is a 14-bit image. What's the number you get?
16,384.
16,384. In Camera Raw, you have 16,384 tones that you can push around. In 256. Which would you rather push around? You can do a lot of pushing here without fucking your image up. You do a lot of pushing in here and you shatter the tonal range of your image. Does this make sense? At its very most basic. Okay, so back into Photoshop, sorry. Yeah, I know, right? Aren't you happy I didn't ask you to do that? However, there are other things that we do want to do in here. And the other things that we want to do in here are things that, well, clearly, if you get into compositing, you do that with multiple layers. But I want to show you some of the basic things that we can do here in Photoshop that a lot of people do here into Photoshop. And it's basically tweaking what you think about doing in Camera Raw, we call global adjustments. When we change the contrast in there, we change the contrast to the whole image. When we lighten something up or darken something down using exposure, we do it to the whole image. Now, there are ways that you can go in and use adjustment brushes and all that kind of stuff. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about, and that's much deeper than I want to get into in this class probably. However, we can do what they are called local adjustments here in Photoshop, and that's the part that I want to talk about next. So the first local adjustment that I want to actually show you, again, and it's an adjustment layer, is if you click on this, I want you to actually come up and put, let's start out first. Let's just add an empty layer on top. So go ahead and hit an empty layer up on top of this. Oh, that's what I was going to show. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. If you've done this, throw that empty layer away. I want to show you what I was talking about, how if we really wanted to paint on this image or do something to this image, how we would actually do it. If you want to make a copy of this layer, there's a number of ways of doing it. The easiest way is to simply grab the layer and drag it on top of that dog-eared piece of paper that's right next to the garbage can. When you do that, it will make a copy of your layer, and you'll see you'll have 2 of them right now. That's one way of doing it. I'm going to hit Command-Z to undo that, or go back in History to undo that. Another way of doing it is to come up to the layer menu and come down to, you can tell I never do it this way. Duplicate layer, thank you. And it's going to say, do you want to do another one here, and ask if you want to name it. You can do it that way as well. Regardless of how you do it, you need to get another layer. However, this is also a smart object, and it is also protected. we need to do what they call rasterize this layer. We need to get rid of that little icon. In order to, first off, just notice, again, hit the B key. You'll notice you can't paint on this guy. You get that little circle with the line through it. To come up to the layer menu, come down to Smart Objects, and then down at the bottom is Rasterize. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to, again, come in the layer menu down to Rasterize and do Smart Object. Either way, I typically come down to Smart Object, down to Rasterize. Look up at my screen, you'll see where I am. Layer menu, Smart Object, Rasterize. It turns it into a normal object. It turns it into a stupid object. And you will see what has happened now. If you look at the layer, look at the little icon at the bottom. That little layer is gone. That little icon is gone. It's no longer there, right? If you double click on that layer, do you go back into Camera Raw? No, you don't. This is a completely baked image. You bring up the Layer Styles dialog box, which won't help you at all. This is a baked image now. If you hit the B key and you can get a brush, you can now paint on your image. If you paint on your image and it looks like mine, it's because you have not reset the flow of your image. So what I need you guys to do is every single time you pick a tool in Photoshop, your eyes need to be going up here to the top. And you need to be reading across here to make sure that this is all set the way you want it to be. Is your brush hard or soft? Well, I don't know, but I can check. So I'm going to do my drop-down menu here. I've got a completely hard brush. We'll talk about modes later on. My opacity is 100%, but my flow is only 10%. So I'm going to click and drag it up to 100%, and now I can paint with black all over my image. Isn't that grand? Yes?
When we did the test to like see if the paper can go over it,
Yeah.
I pressed OK, and then it like let it happen after I pressed OK. But it
Oh, because you said that this thing is dropped down. You need to click out of here to get rid of that. So can you show me what happened again?
No, it's already happened. Like I can still draw this.
Right, but you can't draw on the one underneath.
I did before.
You can't.
I mean, it let me at one point again.
Move your thing off and let me see. You know, that's not a smart object. That didn't open as a smart object. But it didn't open as a smart object. That's why you can do it. Don't worry, don't worry. You'll do it later, okay? So guys, again, okay, I need everybody to check this out. So you should have painted on your image. That all looks great. Again, if you turn off the eyeball, that goes away. And you can tell the image that you're working on because, or the layer that you're working on, because this is highlighted right here, right? If you want to go back and work on your smart object, click on the smart object. Everybody look at this. Come on, guys, I need you to focus and stay with me. If you don't get it today, you're going to really be swimming. To make this layer active, again, if you click on it, you'll see that this is now highlighted. The smart object is now highlighted. I've turned off the eyeball on my second layer right now. And now again, if you try to use your brush on this, you will not be able to do that because this is a smart object and it is protected. If you turn on this top image again, you can go back. I can't work on it. Why can't I work on it? I can see it, but why can't I work? Why can't I paint on this?
The layer that's left there.
Because it's not the active layer. The layer that is active is my smart object, the bottom one that is highlighted. To work on the one that I was painting on, I need to make that second layer active. So I click on this second layer up here. It is now active, and now I can go back and paint on it some more. Yes? Then it's not a smart object. Do you see that little guy in there?
No.
See again. It used to be that this got rasterized, not the copy that you made. So wait. It's not all hope is lost. Let's go back in your history and see right there where it says rasterized layer. Go back one step before it. Now you got your smart object, copy it,
Okay, so I
and now rasterize the copy. Leave the bottom alone. Okay, wait a second, guys. Everybody look up here. This is what happened. This is how to get out of it. Because a lot of people have done this. They ended up rasterizing the original smart object. So if you have done that, look at your history palette. Go over to your history palette. Scroll up to the top. You're looking for rasterized image. And mine is right here, rasterized smart object. if I click one step before that, that's when I duplicated my smart object. Now I'm back. I've got both smart objects. Make sure that you pick the top one up to layer, down to smart object, rasterize that smart object. Now you should be where all the rest of us are. Again, this whole thing about having history, this is, they don't teach history in any of the other digital ones till like way later in the game. Did that work for you? Could you get back? Yeah, right?
I'm lost. Sorry.
That's all right.
I'm gonna be honest. So I went to Rasterize. I
Yeah.
don't know what that means, but
Yeah, but hang on, because this is not a smart object now. We need to find out in here where that happens. See this rasterize layer? You need to go back one step before that. You don't want that thing rasterized. Now this is your original smart object again. Copy this by dragging it down to the dog of your guy.
This looks like.
You can throw this copy away. Now you got two copies of it. Up to layer.
I mean, it's not really.
Down to smart object.
They are.
That means this now you can work on it. It's no longer smart object. You double click on it, it won't open up. See that? Hey guys, maybe this will help. Maybe this will help. Let me show this to everybody. Because again, the whole thing that I've got about Photoshop, about how small could they make this shit? Look at how big my icons are. I can actually see this stuff. It's not because I'm an old man that wears glasses. Well, I love that. At any rate, if you come over to look up at my screen really quick, there's a drop-down menu on the layers palette right here. If you click on this drop-down menu, it's on the far right-hand side. On this, it's this little drop-down guy right here. You can come down to panel options, and you can click on the largest of the thumbnails, not the smallest or not none, but the largest, and say OK. And now you might actually be able to see that smart object icon. At the layers drop, look at my drop-down menu. The drop-down menu is right here. It's on. You see where I'm talking about? This guy right here. Here, let me move this over just a little bit so you can see it. It's this little drop-down menu right here. Look up at my screen. It's right across from layers. It's this palette. It's this drop-down right here. This controls it for all of them. Click on this and come down to panel options. This thing will pop open and you can click the big thumbnail and say OK, and then you'll have these big guys and you'll actually be able to see this. Okay. So the next thing that I'm actually going to show you is an adjustment layer. So again, in the icons that are down on the bottom, I want you to click on the one that is got the half circle, and I want you to come up and pick curves. And when you come up and pick curves, you will actually see a change in everything. You get this adjustment layer on your thing. It's actually called curves. But you'll also, up here in your properties, you will actually get a graph up here in your properties. Now, we can't see the entire graph in the properties, so you actually need to make that window a little bit bigger. To make this thing bigger, again, you click, you just hover over the area where the properties palette meets history, click and drag down so that you can see what you need to see is the entire graph, but you also need to see this input output labels at the bottom. Now, what that's done is that's actually forced layers down here so that we can't see the very bottom of layers. This is why screen real estate becomes so important, is things exactly like this. If you want to see more of your layers at the bottom to get that back, let's shrink the history palette up a little bit. So I'm simply going to drag this up. So now I can see all of my properties and I can see all of my layers palette as well. So here's the thing. Curves is the single most important tonal thing. There was a time when people were only scanning stuff to run into Photoshop. People were scanning film. You did not have raw data. So the way all the color and tonal controls were done were actually done in Photoshop. There was no raw, there was no camera raw, that did not exist. All of this stuff was actually done with curves. There is levels. You can also do some of this work with levels, but let me ask this. This is a question for the whole class. How many people want to learn how to do this shit twice? We can start off with levels, which is the dumbed down version of curves, or we can just jump into curves and learn only one thing.
curves.
Exactly. I have no idea why they insist on doing levels. We're not going to do levels in this class. So here's the thing about curves and the way they work. You remember we have talked about our tonal range. What's the tonal range in numbers in Photoshop? What do we go from? From what to what? What number to what number? 0 to 255, right? That's the tonal range. Now, we have that in reds, we've got that in greens, and we've got that in blues, but we've also got that basically in grays. Because if we do all the same values for reds and greens and blues, it's the same thing as doing this scale basically for grayscale. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Okay, is there anybody not sure about that one? Okay, so we tend to think of it this way, and we run curves this way. So what's happening in the curve that you are looking at, I'll actually do it on screen so you can see what we're talking about. What happens on this curve right here is you'll see in this area right down here, this area at this point in the far lower left-hand corner is 0, 0, 0. This is your shadow point. And what you'll look at, if you hover your little cursor over that and you can get to that perfect corner, you'll see that you have an input of 0 and an output of 0. If you come up right where this guy crosses that thing and you can get it exactly right in the middle, this one's a really hard one to actually hit. What you'll ultimately see, if you can get it right on that point, I can't really get mine right on that point. It's right in the middle. It's right in this crosshair part right here. You will see, you should get to, it's really hard to hit it exactly. You'll get to 128, 128. Again, it's an input. Mine says 125, but that's because I'm not right on that line. If I was exactly on that line, and what you'll see, again, if you go to the very top corner, the very top right-hand corner, at this very corner up here, you will see, if you can actually get up to exactly that very top point, you will actually get an input reading of 255, 255, 255. 255 input, 255 output. What this curve is telling you, and anywhere along the curve, if you can get on the line, it doesn't matter, but you need to be right exactly on that line. What you'll end up getting is a readout. Sorry. You should be getting a readout of the input and output should be identical if you can get right on that line. So what this is saying is this curve is having no impact on this image at all right now. All of the input values equal all of the output values, but I can change those. So let me ask you what would happen. What would happen if I took my 0 input right here and made it 255? It would be all white, right? And you can actually do that. If you come and you click on the button right down here, the little dot right down here, that is your 0, 0, 0, and you drag it straight up to the top, what you have said is, I not only want my 0 to be 255, but it took the rest of the curve with it, and the rest of the curve with it, every single value on that now is also reading 255. Does that make sense what just happened? Yeah. You can click and bring that right back down. If by the other token, what would happen if I clicked on the 255, 255, just that 255 and drug it down to 0? What would happen? My image would go black. And that will indeed happen as you drag that down. It goes to black. If you drag it up. Now what's going to happen, and I don't do this yet, I just want to know what you guys think is going to happen. What happens if I click on the midpoint right here and drag it up?
Tones are going to increase.
And they're going to do what? Get lighter or darker? Again, if you look at what's happening here, can you see the tones that are on the side here and the tones that run along the bottom? This helps give you an indication of what's going to happen. If you click right here in the middle and drag up, you're going to be making those tones lighter. And look at your input and output. When you click on something, I'm going to try and get right in the middle. I'm going to try to get close to 128. It won't be exact. But I've clicked on that. I did hit 128. But now as I start to drag up, you'll see that right now with my image, I've got an input of 129, but an output of 168. What I'm telling Photoshop to do is take all the tones that were 129 and make them 167. That's what a curve does. And it lightens up my midtones. My shadows are still anchored at 0, 0, 0, at 0, and my highlights are still anchored up at 255. So the only thing I've done is lightened up my midtones. Does this make sense, what's going on? If you want to get rid of that point, you simply click on the point itself and tear it off really quickly. Just yank it, just yank to get rid of it. If I click on that very same point and drag down, now I'm actually making my midtones lighter, and I do it gradually. The most extreme area that I'm changing right here is this 132 is now down to 100. I've changed my 132 by about 32 points because I drug it down to 100, right? But if you hover over an area that's had a less of extreme bend in the curve, like down here, and you click on this point down here, you'll see that down here I went from 70 down to 45. It's not as an extreme a change here because because the curve is actually bent. Does that make sense? And then as I get even closer to my 0 point down here, you'll see that the change is even less because I've pulled this curve down even less. Here, so down here, I've only got a 10-point shift in tone. Up here, I've got a 35% shift in tone. Does that make sense? So you see that you can remap tones doing this, and you can do multiple points doing it. If you've done all of this and you want to get rid of all of your points, you simply do this preset drop down and go back up to default, and it will get rid of all of these points for you. To build contrast, what is a contrast? If I wanted to increase the contrast in this image, what does that really mean? Doesn't it mean that I make my dark areas darker and my light areas lighter? Can I do that with a curve? Yes, I can. To build contrast in a curve, click on this point right in here. I'm going to say right in, it's this first junction right here, and I'm just picking arbitrary points. I want you to click and slightly drag this down, and you'll see that my blacks just got blacker. Then if I come over here in my highlight area up in here, and I click and I drag this up, this is now, my image is more contrasty. This is called an S-shaped curve. This is a classic contrast building curve. I made my shadows darker, my highlights lighter, and you can see that that's boosted the contrast in my image. If you want to see a before and after, simply turn off the eyeball that's right next to that, and you can see, yes, indeed, this image is a whole lot more contrasty, right? Does this make sense?
Yes. Yes.
You can go the opposite route. If you tear both of those points off or simply go up to default, you can tear this guy off and tear that guy off. We can go the opposite way. I can make my shadows lighter by pulling the shadow point up, and I can make my highlights darker by dragging them down, and now I'm flattening out my image or fucking it up in a horrible, horrible way. That's what flattening your image out actually looks like. But again, that's what I'm doing. I'm remapping these tones. I'm saying I want my shadows to be lighter, my highlights to be darker, and there you go. If you want to go to a full extreme on this, you can actually tear both of those points off. You can do the full extreme, click on the very top point, my 255, my highlight point, drag it down till you read the input will be 255, the output should be 128. Or 128. And then click on the shadow point and drag it up till it reads 128. And you now have destroyed the tonal range of your image. You've now got an image that has one tone in it. Does this make sense what's going on here?
How did you get back to the two course that you made the curve?
Just go click on this custom right here and go to the top and go to all the way up. Keep going, keep going, keep going to default. And it'll get rid of all your points. And you can start over. Does this make sense what's going on here? So what images, what curves do is they actually do tonal remapping. However, again, back up to your default on this for me, if you will, really quick. So click on the custom preset all the way up to the top to default. What you also realize is that this is for all the RGB layers together. This is equal. If you click on this drop-down menu, you can do this on a color-by-color basis. The first one by default, you're changing everybody equally. That's why the color didn't shift in this image, just the tonal range shifted. But you can do this for the red channel alone. So for instance, if you take the red channel alone and click the midtones and drag up, you see you start to push red up into the midtone areas in here. Again, I didn't put a lot of red in my highlights here. I don't have a lot of red in the shadows because this curve, again, by the time I get to my very highlights, very little red has changed here. Some has changed, but not as much. It's changed in these midtones right here. Does that make sense to you guys? You can also anchor points here. So for instance, if you've done this, tear this guy off. You can actually click on an anchor point. So if you simply click right in the very middle, as close as you can to the middle, click and don't move it at all. That is now set a fixed point. Now if you click in your highlights and drag up, you will actually see that this guy does not move at all. If you did that, you'll see that you're really driving it harder in the highlights. There's a small shift in the shadows. If you tear that highlight point off, you can do a second point down here in the shadows, again, to fix that curve so it doesn't move. And now when you click and drag this highlight point at the top, you are not affecting the shadows at all. You are only changing the red in this highlight range. The shadows have been frozen by those points. Does that make sense what's going on here? You cannot do this kind of work with levels. And that's why I don't think working with levels, it's just ridiculous to actually start this whole process. Does that make sense what we're doing here? Are there questions about this, guys? Say what?
I'm just not thinking about it, but
Don't worry, we're going to keep working with it. You'll be getting together. Are you guys doing okay over here? Are we getting this over here? Are we just giving up in here? We're good. No, we're good. We're good. We're good. You're just keeping on. We're good on this, right? Yeah. Okay. All right, guys. So that's basically working with curves, and it's how people do the majority of their tonal correction. So if you've done all of this, you can simply turn. You can leave the weird color on it. I don't care. You can turn this guy off. What the last thing I want you to notice, though, is this little thing right here. See that little white panel right there? That thing is called a layer mask. And what it is, well, look, can you see my hand up here on the screen?
Yes.
Can you see the area of the image that my hand is covering?
Yes.
No, you can't. You can see the image around it, but you can't see the image in that area right there, right? That's called it's being masked off. You can't see it, right? So the next curve that I want, adjustment layer that I want to show you guys really quickly, and this will be pretty much it for curves right now. Adjustment layers. Click again on the next adjustment layer, and I want you to put on black and white. That's another one that's actually done here. And when you put a black and white layer on, you will actually see that your image now turns to black and white. However, it's just the adjustment layer that's doing it. Your image is underneath is still in color. So if you turn off the eyeball for black and white, you get the color back. This is why people do black and white conversions here, not in camera raw. You're much better off doing all of your work, any work that we need to do down here, and then just making the whole thing black and white. But what I wanted to show you is this, and it's the last part of this, because it's the wow factor in this. It's the thing that hopefully will open up a reason why we are in Photoshop and why we're not doing this in Lightroom. And it comes down to this. This layer mask is white. The thing you need to remember about layer masking is this. White reveals, black conceals. So everybody say that with me. White reveals, black conceals. One more time. White reveals, black conceals. That's how this layer masking works, and it looks like this. If you hit the B key to get a brush, and then again hit the D key to get your foreground and backgrounds to default to black and white, hit the X key if white was your foreground color. I want to be painting with black on this layer mask. The reason I know I'm painting on this layer mask is, can you see these little brackets that are around the layer mask? You can tell that the layer is active. You can see the layer is highlighted. The mask is active. It's got those little brackets around it. If you then take your brush, go again, always, every time you do a brush, come up here to the brush menu. I want you to click on this drop down. I want you to do a soft brush, so click and drag the hardness all the way down. I want you to make sure it's 100% opacity, 100% flow. Click out of this area up here. And I am using a 400 size brush. This actually works pretty good for me. Make sure you're painting on this layer mask. And I want you to paint this girl's hair and face alone.
Because it's taking all the color that we're putting.
And then paint her hands. Okay, everybody look up at my screen right now because I have now got a black and white image and a color image at the same time. And you guys should be fist pumping right now because this is when the cool fun shit starts. So again, what I've got on this is this. There is a black and white adjustment layer on here that has a layer mask built into it. The layer mask is entirely white, so everything in my image is being turned to black and white. But when I paint on this mask using a black brush, it hides the adjustment layer. It hides just this part. So you can see on my black and white adjustment layer, I've got just the hair and the face and her two hands. I've painted those black, which has held that stuff back. And you can start to do really creepy shit like that. No, I'm serious. Come on, how cool is that?
I did that on iPhoto.
Right? Is this working for you guys? Okay, your black and white adjustment layer. This guy, you're on this layer right now. And you need to switch this because you need to be painting with black. If you're painting with white, you don't see anything. Hit the B key for the brush. Hit the X key to swap those two colors. And then paint that face. Yep. Did that work? Oh, it gets better. It gets better. It gets better. So look at the area on mine right now. You can see this little area right in here where you can see the green glass behind it. We need to make our brush smaller. So go up to this drop-down menu, click on this, drag it down, make your brush closer to like 80, 90 pixels. Click out of here. You've now got a smaller brush. Hit the X key to paint with white because this area got painted in with black. And now you can simply paint in the black and white back into it. Or if you want to zoom in, and to zoom in, this is the zoom, this is the magnifying glass tool right here. Simply click on the magnifying glass tool and click in. You can come in like this, and then again, hit the B key to go back to the brush. Using white, I'm going to paint her eyes so that her eyes go back to black and white. Does this make sense what's going on here? Are there questions about this? Guys, this opens up a world to you that you cannot imagine. This is the beginning of manipulating in Photoshop. Oh yeah, check this out. Again, huge, huge, huge here. Okay, one last thing I want to show you really quick. So we've got several layers going on here. This is our perfect image now. We love what we've got going on here. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the curve again, this guy right here, the curve right here. And the curve puts a bunch of red into her. You can name curves. So if you double click on the name, don't double click on, this is the layer mask. This is the actual curve. But if you double click on this name, the name is open to you and you can do add red or whatever you want to call it. You should start getting in the habit of naming your curves because by the time you get into 30, 40, 50, 100 curves, you have no idea what they are because they're just called curve 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You want to get into the habit of labeling all of these. So even though our black and white layer seems pretty evident that what it is, you just, you know, again, if this didn't say black and white, maybe you want to name this and say, you would call this B&W except for skin or something like that. I mean, you just start naming these things so that 6 months down the line when you come back into this image, you know exactly how to work with it. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, the final thing we need to do, and it's the final thing you need to do before you know how to print, and then we are going to go out in the lab and get a print demo coming out of Photoshop. Is that okay?
Yes.
So the final thing that you need to do before this is that you actually need to sharpen this image. Because when you print, this is what happens. Think about this. When ink hits a piece of paper, it spreads. Paper is absorbent. So think about what happens when you, okay, this is going to be gross, sorry, but it's the first thing that came to mind. When you blow your nose on a piece of Kleenex, it spreads out. The fiber of the Kleenex, the paper absorbs that liquid and it runs, it spreads out. That happens in all printing. It happens in inkjet printing. So in order to fight that, we need to actually make our images sharper at this stage of the game so that when the softening happens when you print it out, you get the image that you wanted to have. Does that make sense? So in order to do this, there's a trick that they use in Photoshop. There's a number of ways of doing sharpening. We'll talk about other ways, but I'm going to show you the way they want you guys to start, and it actually is pretty effective. However, this operates as a layer, but the problem that I've got right now is I've actually got 4 layers on here that are creating this image. What I need is a composite of all of them together that I can then use as my sharpening layer. Does that make sense? So in order to do this, and there's PDFs on the Moodle site about all of this, about working with curves, about what we're going to do right now, the sharpening. There's a PDF that's got the recipe. So if you are, the video is going to be available to you. All of that stuff, go back to it, post it in the forum if you forget how to do it. There's a gazillion ways. So I know this is a lot of information. Just keep it, stay with me. It starts to become second nature. So the way you want to do this, we need to make a composite of all the layers that we've done. In order to do that, select the very top image. You need to make sure that anything you want in this composite is visible. So you need to make sure the eyeballs are on. So for instance, if you didn't want the red to be a part of this composite, you would simply turn it off. And you still, and then your composite will not have that red in it. If you want the red in it, you have to have it visible. In my case, I'm going to leave it off. Select the very top layer, and then this is the keyboard shortcut that you hold down. The command key that is just to the left of your space bar. The option key that is just to the left of it. The shift key, which is to the left and 1 row up. And hit the letter E. And what that will do is give you a merged stamped version of everything. And it's sitting right up here on top. So again, the keyboard shortcut again is the command key, which is the key just to the left of the space bar. The option key, it's the key just next to it on the left-hand side. The shift key, which is 1 row up all the way to the left, and the letter E. So command, option, shift, E. Command, option, shift, E.
Is that the same as like flattening it?
No, this is not flattening it because we've still got all our layers that built it. All the layers that built it are still sitting here underneath it. If you flatten that image, this all goes away and you have one image.
Right, but then is it the same as copying that flattened image?
It can be, yes, yeah. It's the way people, old school, the way people used to do it. So does everybody have this guy? Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is this. Up to the filter menu, down to, I never remember where this is, down to other, and over to high pass. And a dialog box will open up, and your image should change to grayscale. And you should have a thing down here that actually lets you change the radius of this. The radius you want to use is right around 1. You'll see a radius of 0.9 to a radius of 1.1, 1.2 is pretty much that's the only place that you really want to go. If you can see your image, what you'll see in your image is that this high pass filter finds your edges. It's really hard to see, but that's what it's doing. If you actually crank this radius up, you'll actually see it grabs a whole lot more, but this would actually be too much. So again, you want to stick somewhere around a 0.9, a 1, 1.2. You can actually type values in here as well. You can even use your arrow keys to go up and down if this thing has been highlighted. So I'm going to go with like a 1.1 on mine, and I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. And what this has now done is it's just made this copy, it's found the edges, and you can see the edges have been highlighted where you can see in the skin tone there's really nothing there, but there's a lot of detail that's happening in the eyes, in the teeth, in the hair, and that kind of stuff. The final thing to do is we need to change the blending mode of this layer. Now, this is a lot, guys. We get into blending modes throughout the rest of your lives in Photoshop. Just suffice it to say, follow the recipe for right now. It's right here on this layers palette. You see this thing that says normal? You click on this drop down and you come down to overlay. And your image will change back to color. But now when you turn the eyeball on this thing on and off, you will see that it's sharpening your image. Especially if you zoom into the eyes and take a look at what's going on here. You'll see that things are definitely being sharpened up. Those edges are being sharpened. And this is just about the right amount that you need to counteract the softness that's created by printing. You got the gray, that's where you want to be. Last move in here is to simply change the blending mode. This normal right here. click and drop down to overlay.
So we made it gray and like sharpened it without actually making the whole photo gray because we just changed the map.
Changing the blending mode, yeah, it just does the sharpening part. Although you get this kind of the thing once, it doesn't matter. But are you good on that?
Yeah, so you're saying that like whenever we want to print something, that's how we should
Yes.
do it?
So guys, here's it. This is the final step. So listen, everybody listen. Before you're printing out of Photoshop, you want to actually be sharpening your images to take care of this. We will get into more sophisticated sharpening later on in this class, but this is a good first move. Does this make sense? So your job to do your printing, and then we're going to go out and right now and spend the next hour actually working on printing stuff out there. They're going to demo stuff to us as a group first, just to make sure that everybody gets all the information first. And then if you guys want to do some printing right now after they get through the demo, you're welcome to do that. Because for next week, what is due for next week is 5 prints. 5 of your best prints, the best of the work that you did on the walking around assignment. You're going to bring those prints in. We are going to look at prints, and we are going to critique those prints here in class. I will send you an email. We probably will not be meeting in the space because there's no critique space in here. I think we'll be meeting in 904, but I'll let you guys know that during the week, okay? Are there questions about this? Yes. I want them edited. I want you to make the best looking photograph that you can make. So I know that you're really interested in doing black and white. If you want to do black and white, you guys just saw how to do black and white. If you want to do mixed color shit and you want to do zombie pictures, I don't care what it is you do, but you have to be able to get up and defend it.
So you want us to do whatever?
I encourage whatever.
I mean, I didn't really shoot anything exciting, but that's exciting news.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're excited.
I think it's exciting news. I literally have not.
Wait. Great question. The question was, can you edit in Photoshop? That's the only place I want you to edit. I don't want you doing any of this work in Lightroom. None of it. And the other thing, you have to turn in this Photoshop file. This is a Photoshop file right now. You need to save the layered Photoshop file and also turn that into me, because that way I can look to see what work you did do in Photoshop. Whether you use curves, whether you, if you use smart objects, I'm going to be able to open this up and see the corrections that you made in Camera Raw. And if you're not doing this in smart objects, I'm not going to be happy. Because I busted my ass and I catch all sorts of shit at every faculty meeting defending your all's intelligence. Because you are all fucking brilliant.
And this is written in the thing online on Moodle.
What is?
Like some of these steps.
Everything. So real quick, and then we'll go. Are there other questions about what we've done so far? Okay, really quick, guys, look on the Moodle site really fast, and then we're moving out into the lab. So on our Moodle site, if you go to our site, right here, if you go down to this week, which is session 3 right here, it is stuff we've done into here. This is a thing on curves. We didn't do dodge and burn soft light layer here. We'll do that next week. This is the output sharpening right here. These are the printer directions, but they've changed all the printers in the lab. So this is for the 3880s and the 4900s. We're not working on those guys right now. Other thing, this is the ACR. This is Lightroom and Development Workflow. This will be exactly what I just, although my version of this, what I showed you guys is more complete. Their version of this just explains to you what those controllers are. They never tell you how to use them. I just told you how to use them. Are there questions? Yes.
When we're saving the Photoshop files, so
Yeah.
we can see everything we did.
Yeah.
Is there like a thing that tells us how to do that, or is that just really?
Oh, no, we'll just do it. We'll just do it. So in your Photoshop file, when you want to save it, just come up to the File menu, come down to Save As. And then again, use the naming convention that I asked you guys to use. So again, you're going to turn in 5 files. So the very final thing on this name will be image 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for assignment, whatever. It's assignment 3.1, I think. So just look at the naming convention, save it that way. That's what you guys will turn in next week. Yes?
How do you move from Lightroom to Photoshop?
I'll do that again for you really quick.
These
Yes.
are our phone pictures, right? Because I already went back and shot with my camera.
No, these are your camera pictures. These are the real deal. Okay. So no, wait, I'm going to show you that really quick. I'm going to jump into Lightroom really fast.
Yeah.
Okay, so look at my screen really quick. There was the last question about how you transfer, again, move files from Lightroom into Photoshop. You pick the file in Photoshop. You need to make sure that it is a raw file. And you can tell by looking down here. This is not a raw file. This is a TIFF file. Look down here where I'm pointing. It says right down here, .tiff. Your raw files are either going to be CR2 files or they're going to be NEF files. Or if you're Sony, I don't know what Sony's is. What do you shoot with? Nikon, so it's an NEF file. So just make sure that this is down here. You select that file. You come up to the photo menu, down to, don't do any work here. You do not want to develop this file in Lightroom. You do not want to do any of this work in Lightroom. Everything is done in Photoshop. So you just edit it. This is the one you want to do. You select the file. You come up to the photo menu, down to edit in, and then do not pick this up here. That brings your file in, not as a smart object. You want to come down here, open as smart object in Photoshop. And when you do that, this thing will then translate. It will go immediately into Photoshop as a smart object, eventually, that you can then double click on, and you will be in Camera Raw, and you can do all your adjusting.
Can we do one at a time?
If you want to do, that's actually a good question. Why don't we find out? All right, so I've selected both of these, and I'm going to bring both of these into Photoshop. Edit in, open as smart objects in Photoshop. We'll see what happens. Does it?
So are you saying that when you're editing photos, you only do one at a time?
I come in, I show you the way that I actually did it. See, the problem here is that these are now separate files, and I can open either one, but I don't have the advantage of the other one to pick off the color correction. So I would simply open them from the Finder. Simply find the photos in your capture folder on your Finder and open them directly from there. Yeah, exactly. You can open as many as you want. Exactly. All right, are we good? Yes. Shoot. Yes, I promise you next week we will start with that. I promise you. Because this is exactly an issue that's happening right here. Well, this doesn't look right to me. It's like, it's the monitor.
Well, I really want to do mine. That's why.
Yeah, next week, I promise you. I promise you, okay? We'll start with it next week. Hit me up first thing when you walk in the door.
Okay.
And we'll go there, I swear.
Okay.
Okay, guys, so you need to grab all your stuff. Well, actually, you can leave your stuff here. I don't think there's any. If you want to grab your stuff, grab your stuff. We're going to go out and get a quick demo, and then if you want to spend the rest of this class actually trying to do some printing, you're welcome to do that, and I'll be hanging around if you have any questions.
Still have to shoot with the meeting format?